the Quinn Marr Show.
This show is brought to you by Bing Pot Trivia. How many times have you been to a trivia night where it just felt like somebody reading questions? Well, Bing Pot Trivia prides themselves on bringing high-energy, dynamic hosts to every event. The show leans heavily on visual elements. Their questions are designed to make you laugh or roll your eyes, while also challenging your knowledge on pop culture, high school science, culinary arts, and everything in between. Their typical show runs 5 rounds, including a photo round, general knowledge on pop culture, riffs on different game shows, absurd 50-50 questions, and a super sweet music round. Check out bingpottrivia.com today to book your trivia night. Again, that is at bingpottrivia.com. Tell my boy Danny that your friend Quinn sent you. All right, let's get on with the show. My next guest is a heavy hitter of my comedy world. He's been a part of some legendary improv organizations. You may know him from The Dana Carvey Show, Johnny Knoxville's The Ringer, or my personal favorite, the fun-loving but sometimes grumpy bolo tie wearing high school principal, Mr. Lariate from Disney's Wizards of Waverly Place. It is my pleasure to welcome to the Quinn Marr Show, Bill Chott. Bill, how is it going?
Doing good, Quinn. Thanks for having me on.
I appreciate you coming on here. I was just saying to you before we started, it's pretty cool that me being such a fan of a show like Wizards and The Ringer, maybe when I was a bit too young, it's amazing to be able to chat with you. The first thing I wanted to talk about was Bill as a kid growing up in Missouri. What was that young Bill like? Was he a comic book kid? Was he a movie guy? Was he sports? I just want to figure out what little Bill was like.
Well, I grew up partially in Missouri, but I also grew up in Texas when I was about 3 years old. Then we moved back to Missouri, usually around St. Louis area every time we were back in Missouri. And then we moved to Michigan, then back to St. Louis, and then Pennsylvania, then back to St. Louis. We usually moved about 2 times within each city. So we moved twice in Pennsylvania, moved twice in Michigan. So almost a different school every year.
Was it something your parents did like for work that why you guys moved so much?
We were on the lam. No,
that'd be a cool story.
Some people guess that I was a preacher's kid, and although later my dad did become an Orthodox Catholic priest, he was not a minister, and while he was in the military, we were not, moving around with him. He just served a few years there. In the early 60s. So although we were not technically a military family or a preacher's kid, he was a writer. He used to write for corporations. So when we moved down to Texas, he was writing for Shell Oil. We moved back to St. Louis. He was working for a company called Merritt's. And then they started a division called the Communico division, and he started taking on some freelance work with some other creatives. And then so we moved all over. Wherever the work took us, that's where we would go.
Yeah.
And then the last big move that we made was when he went to study to be an Orthodox Catholic priest at St. Tikhon's Orthodox Monastery and Seminary in South Canaan, Pennsylvania. Okay. So, young Bill was always the new kid. So it was kind of awkward for me making new friends all the time. It's not something I wanted to do. It's something that became easier for me the older I got, for sure. I wasn't so much into sports. I was definitely into comedy. I would hear laughter coming out from the living room when my parents were watching TV, and I'd always run out whenever it was something funny on TV. And I loved classic comedy. I know a lot of kids that age get into the Three Stooges, but I was more of a Abbott and Costello fan.
Mm-hmm.
So I loved all the wordplay.
Mm-hmm.
And then I later found out there was some wordplay involved with Three Stooges, but Abbott and Costello were light on the slapping around and heavy on the wordplay, and Three Stooges were the other way around.
Were you a Martin and Lewis kid at all, or no?
Oh, I loved Martin and Lewis. Yeah.
Fair enough.
For some reason, I was always more of a fan of Dean Martin than of Jerry Lewis.
Yeah, I mean, I could see that because at times Jerry Lewis would get pretty annoying, I think.
Yeah, but he also, I later found out what an innovator he was in film as a director.
Mhm.
And so I gained a lot more respect for him the more I learned about what was going on behind the camera. Yeah, it was something so cool about Dean Martin that I looked up to that cool sense of just presenting to an audience and being the hapless victim to somebody who's like going way over the top.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, Dean Martin was a guy that like 99% of us could never be as cool as.
Yeah, and never will.
No, like he was just born cool.
Yeah, I think the country singer Blake Shelton is about as close as we'll ever get to that sort of cool.
Yeah, I like that comparison.
Ain't it still cool to be a drunk?
Right. Yeah. I've never thought of the Blake Shelton and Dean Martin coolness factor in this on the same level, but no, that's a good point.
Oh yeah.
So was it a lot of when you would be watching like the Three Stooges, Martin Lewis, was it a lot of you were trying to not copy, but like you were trying to also like imitate comedy early on?
Yeah.
And
I think everybody that starts off in comedy is in a certain way paying homage to the greats, and like, when I got a little bit older, I would be repeating Eddie Murphy's stand-up to kids at school, and probably not an appropriate environment for some of the comedy.
Right.
But, and when he was developing, he would repeat what he heard Richard Pryor say. So it's generational. I think everybody borrows from the generation before them and pays tribute to it, and then kind of learns how to start making things their own.
Mm-hmm. When you were growing up and like you were obviously such a big fan of comedy and stuff, were you always like in like plays and musicals and stuff in school, or is that not really your thing? Oh yeah.
Oh, definitely.
So you weren't really a shy kid then?
Not really. Well, I wasn't shy in terms of like, put me in front of a crowd and I would just, you wouldn't have to ask me twice.
Right.
I was very shy when I would get in a new environment, and I wouldn't go around and introduce myself. I would wait until somebody introduced themselves to me, and then I would prove to be an interesting kid. And I also did magic. I was also a big magic dork. So as soon as I would meet a new friend, I would show them some trick or something like that. And then I would make a new friend for a while. And then I was really bad about keeping in touch as a kid with friends. So we would move and I wouldn't stay like pen pals or anything. I guess it's easier today with social media and email and all that to do so. But I never really sent letters back and forth to my old friends. So I have very few friends from my early youth. There's only one friend really. I guess there's a few friends from high school that I'm still in touch with, but one of my main best friends from high school I'm still in touch with. So
my mom was kind of in the same boat as you. Like she was always moving and changing schools, and she always talks about how like it sucked always being the new kid. And I always tell her that being like someone like me who never switched schools, I was always like in the same place. It was always the new kid. It was like ended up being like the most like interesting one, because like all of a sudden, wow, there's someone new here. Like we want to figure out who they are and like have them like kind of join into like the group. So it's interesting that you were shy, but at the same time, like once you became friends with someone, you kind of showed them your interest right away.
Yeah, if only the new kids could know that knowledge. If only the new kids could know that there was an exotic nature to them. Because I would always feel jealous because the other kids would have known each other since kindergarten. They already knew everybody's names. They didn't have any new names to learn. They knew who liked music. They knew who liked,
that's
baseball.
Fair.
They knew who liked whatever. So they,
to someone that was always in the same place, it was very boring not being the new kid. So there's definitely pros and cons of both for sure.
Yeah.
So going into, was it like later into like middle school or like high school when you really got into performing per se? Like, is that when you did more like shows? Were you doing improv yet?
I wasn't doing improv until like my senior year in college, because they didn't have a lot of improv outlets when I was younger. Nowadays, they have all kinds of, they have high school improv teams and improv clubs and things like that for kids to be a part of. And I was mostly in choir, and so we would do choir productions and musicals. We did the musical every year, so I was always in the musical every year in choir, and I guess I started in about middle school doing or maybe even it was pre-middle school, a production called The Pale Pink Dragon. It was a kids musical, and that was my first play. And then I started doing plays in high school and college. And then college, I did a lot more plays as opposed to just musicals. And I really started enjoying exploring the dramatic side of things because previously under that, I was just been doing musicals and really overblown, happy stuff. But it was cool to explore, some different sides of myself and my personality.
That's actually surprising because sometimes, or like a lot of time, I feel like once you kind of start on like the comedy side or vice versa, the drama, you stick to that for a long time. So like, what enticed you about moving over to like dramatic?
Well, just a chance to do something new. And also, I guess to a certain extent, when people know you for comedy, sometimes people don't take you seriously. Like at one point, I told a girl that I loved her and she laughed. She thought it was a joke.
No way.
I'm like, I need to look at what I'm doing with my life here. That I open my heart to somebody and I wind up getting laughter in return. And the older you get, the more you're like, well, I can see why that happened. It was just probably also she just felt uncomfortable.
Instead of saying like,
you're not supposed to just up and say you love somebody when you're not even dating them.
Yeah, you know what? That's fair. That's fair.
It's a little weird. We were good friends, but a woman's not expecting that for a guy to come forward who she's been friends with all this time, and she feels safe and doesn't feel as though he has any other thoughts of her, and all of a sudden says that. So a little bit of that's on me too. But
I love that. That's funny. So then I don't know if I'm like just terrible doing research, but you went to university, and for the life of me, I couldn't figure out, what did you study?
I got a degree in communications with a theater emphasis.
Okay, that makes a little bit more sense then. So
Yeah.
Was there a decision, or was there like a thought at one point that you were just going to do theater or arts? Like that was going to be the main component, or was that never? Really
Yeah, well, I didn't feel qualified to do anything other than act. But my father said, it'd be a good idea to get a degree in something besides just theater. He said, why don't you get a degree in communications? Then you could be a writer, you could be a broadcaster, you could do other facets of things that explore the side of, what you want to get into. So I was like, all right, I did that. And I don't regret that at all.
Mm-hmm.
But the majority of my degree was, theater classes. And, I had a liberal arts education. I studied a lot of things across the board, but anything that was close to my major, there were only a few actual communications classes that I took. The rest were pretty much focused in theater.
Do you feel like anything like from the communication side has like helped you along the way since then, or do you think it's mainly kind of been the theater part?
I think the communications helped me really in high school, because I started off my high school in St. Louis, Missouri. Rittner High School was one of the few high schools that had a radio station. And I guess now with the internet and streaming, it's probably a lot easier for a high school to have a radio station or their own podcasting booth or whatever. Mm-hmm. But back then you needed to have all the broadcasting equipment and a tower and all that. Mm-hmm. And so I was able to be on a radio staff starting my sophomore year in high school. And I think that's where I got a lot of my broadcasting experience. Mm-hmm. So, for example, when I do a podcast or something like that, I feel a lot more comfortable sitting down and having a conversation. And because I also understand, what you're going through and,
right.
What you're doing on the hosting end of things.
Right. Right. No, that's cool. That's cool that even back then, like, I'm not trying to make you sound old, but like the fact that like, your school had a radio station.
I am old though.
Yeah. Well, like even like maybe it's like maybe more in the States, because I can't think of one high school around me that had that. Like my high school now still doesn't have it. Like the high school that I went to, sorry, still
Wow.
doesn't have
Do
something
they
like
have a
that.
media division or anything where they have like cameras or anything?
I don't think so.
People should be using their phones.
I know when I graduated high school 10 years ago.
Uh-huh.
They had like the only like media was like photography class or like the yearbook committee. Like that was really kind of it. So there wasn't really a media side yet. So maybe that's changed, but I know for sure they definitely don't have a radio station. So it seems like your school was like ahead of its time.
Oh yeah, they definitely were.
Yeah.
You know.
So when you finished university, you just up and left and went to Chicago.
I spent a year in St. Louis
Okay.
doing improv because I had some friends who had studied in Chicago and came back, and they were having so much fun doing it, and they invited me to come play. And so I did that for about a year, and then I moved to Chicago and got some formal training. And my first improv teacher was Stephen Colbert.
Yeah, you know what? That's not a bad first teacher to have.
Yep, I'm gonna agree with you there.
I'm like a big comedy fan. Like I was in like drama classes in high school. I was in the musical and plays and stuff. But one thing I've always not been good at is improv. I don't know what it is. To me, I'd rather have like a script or like be told what to say. So for you, going from plays and musicals and all that, then going into improv, what was it that like really enticed you of, I'm just going to make up my own stuff, really?
I always loved doing multiple characters. Like when we were doing plays in high school, I loved it when somebody couldn't be there for a rehearsal, because they had a game or a concert, some other reason why they could not be there for the rehearsal, because I would step in and I would play their roles in the rehearsal. And even during the production, I was at a school that we would like switch up the roles during a production. So some people might, they might have two different people playing the leads and they'd alternate on different nights. But because of that, they needed more character roles. So I loved playing all the different character roles. And improv gives you a chance to hop in and out of character and do a bunch of different characters in a short amount of time. And I may have been a little bit cocky, but I always thought that what I could come up with would be funnier than what somebody could write for me at the time.
Fair. Hey, you know what? If that's true, then it's true.
I think as I grow older, I have more respect for people who, hammer out a script and find the beats and, and all that. But, at the time, I was looking for something a little bit edgier, something that connected more with audiences, and improv was definitely that.
100%. Like I got to give props to everyone who does improv, because just coming up with comedy and just like funny lines on the spot to me is really, really impressive. So like someone like you, like that's crazy. So like props to you, because that's not an easy feat.
Well, thanks. I think also, I got diagnosed as with ADHD 2 years ago. And when I found that out, I was like, that kind of makes sense. I don't like doing script study. I don't like memorizing, I can do it, but it's very stressful for me. And performing was never stressful. Getting out in front of the audience, boom. I never worried about like, what happens if I forget a line? Well, we'll roll with it,
Yeah.
And improv definitely appeals to me on that level.
You just mentioned about being diagnosed with ADHD, and you had mentioned it on the Wizards pod, and I was going back to rewatch that recently. I was diagnosed with it when I was pretty young, like maybe like 11 or 12. So a lot of things you were mentioning, and I had read an interview that you had talked about ADHD too, and I never really thought about it till now as an adult, the things that attributes to. So for you, finding out and being diagnosed as an adult, do you look back at when you were young, like, okay, that makes so much more sense why I did this and this?
Yeah. And for that first year, there was a lot of regret. There was a lot of like, oh, if only I had known. And then I went back and looked at it and I was like, if I had known, yeah, I could have managed some stress a little bit better. I would have taken it less hard on myself. But I also thank goodness that, well, for one thing, people weren't diagnosed as much in my day and age, unless they were really problematic and really hyper. And I can say I'm fortunate enough not to have been somebody who had like I had a little bit of a problem with authority, but I would always manage it and finesse it, you know. I had a little bit of a problem with focus, but not so much that it kept me from getting good grades.
Mm-hmm.
I got extremely good grades, so I should consider myself lucky that that I wasn't on the end of the spectrum that kept me from getting through daily life. And
Mm-hmm.
you know, I'd never gotten in any fights. I never struggled with learning. So at the same time, I hope that everybody who needs to get diagnosed gets diagnosed.
Mm-hmm.
So they can, even if they don't need meds, like I don't think I'm to a point that I need meds. I tried
Mm-hmm.
out the meds. They got me a little too zoomy, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and so it was a little bit too much for me. So I just learned to focus and to create strategies. And sometimes I forget the strategies, and sometimes I forget the things that I need to do to get things done.
Mm-hmm.
But keeping those in mind helps me get back on track when I falter
Right.
and when I seem out of step.
Right. That's something I feel like I need to do that I've never really done, is like create strategies for like definitely things like this when I'm prepping for an interview or I'm doing the editing or getting it ready to post. Something I
Mhm.
definitely need to do is focus more and come up with ways to focus more. Like I'm so bad for like if I'm on here doing something, I'll have a podcast playing as I'm editing a podcast, or I feel like I got to do something while I'm doing something. So
Yes.
that's definitely one problem I have. And it was interesting you mentioned about the meds, because I remember when I was like 11 or 12 when I was diagnosed, we did try meds for a bit, but
Mhm.
two things it did that we had noticed was always made my stomach hurt, even though I'd eat when taking it. And two was I would always just feel like not numb's not the word, but I just feel like kind of like nothing. You know what I mean? Like I'd feel like kind
Mhm.
of tired and just like a ghost of myself, maybe is the right
Do you
way.
remember what meds you were on at the time?
I don't. After this, though, I will ask my mom and I'll message you and I'll let you know,
Yeah.
because my
Um,
parents would probably know.
I'm on Concerta, which is methylphenidate, which is also Ritalin, basically.
Okay,
Um,
I wonder if they would diagnose the same for like younger kids. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised.
yeah, I know, you know, the two biggest steps, the two biggest meds that they hit when you're young are they try with Ritalin and Adderall.
Hmm.
Adderall was the first thing I tried out, and then there was something else that I tried that seemed to kind of work, but
Hmm.
would give me a horrible headache, like this band of pain that went around the back of my head
Hmm.
that I would be feeling every day around 3 p.m. or so,
That's
and
weird.
it would incapacitate me.
Jeez.
Yeah,
Yeah. No. Again, it's crazy some of the side effects it'll give you, and like it's not, to me at least, it wasn't worth, and maybe to my parents, it wasn't worth having those side effects to try to control the ADHD, I guess you could say,
yeah,
at the time. But yeah, there's other things like I'd mentioned that I could do now to try to focus more, because
yeah,
yeah, I'm terrible
yeah.
at
Depending upon the severity, I think for a lot of people, it's just exercise and good sleep. You know, good sleep
fair.
hygiene.
Yeah, I mean, I especially if you were to ask my fiance, I'm good at sleeping. I can fall asleep anywhere, anytime, and really early as well. So I definitely don't have a
That's the
problem with
key.
sleeping. Yeah.
That's the key. I used to be a night owl, you know,
Oh, really?
because well, I would thrive on deadlines, you know. So I'd be staying up all night to get things done.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and now I realized that I don't need to do that. I could just set my own deadlines early,
Mm-hmm.
you
Hey,
know.
fair
That's
enough.
another
Yeah, I
strategy.
that's definitely a side effect was of ADHD is
Mhm.
procrastination, because I was a
Yeah,
king of that in school.
yeah,
So no, I was glad to be able to ask you about that, because yeah, when I saw you mention on the Wizards pod, I felt like that was something that I went through the same as you. So
yeah,
obviously just a bit younger. Before that, we were talking about you going to Chicago to do improv, and your first teacher was Stephen Colbert. So there
yeah.
were three organizations that I read you were part of. That
Mhm.
was the Comedy Sports, IO Theater, and of course the legendary Second City. So
Yes.
moving over to Chicago, you and obviously like that was a big improv place. So in your mind, that wasn't going to be a New York City and LA. It was always going to be Chicago because of those organizations.
Well, I didn't even know about the other clubs. I knew about Second City because I grew up watching SCTV and Saturday Night Live and shows where, you know, some of my favorite performers were always from Second City.
Mm-hmm.
And so um, that's where I knew I wanted to go. And so while I was studying in Second City, I had a good friend who told me, hey, they're having auditions at Comedy Sports. I was like, okay, I'll go do that. And for people who've never seen Comedy Sports before, it's like a competitive improvisation. So it's played as if it's a sport. It has a referee, and there's two teams, a red team and a blue team. And it's a little bit more accessible to people who've never seen improv before. And then Improv Olympic was something that a lot of my friends were doing. And that's how I found out about that, where it's long form improvisation, where you'll get one suggestion and you'll do about a half hour's worth of scenes based on that one suggestion.
Wow.
So it's almost like an improvised dramatic play with a lot of comedy in it. You know, performance art sometimes can be even considered performance art.
Yeah, fair enough. No, again, that's not something I could do a half hour on one topic. That's insane. So for you then, when you had a Stephen Colbert as your teacher, who was he then?
Back then, he was just a performer at Second City's ETC, which is the second experimental stage. He wasn't even a main stage performer at the time. Really nice guy, very kind, very patient. You couldn't ask for a better introduction to the world of improv. That's definitely what he was.
So when you were there, what was your daytime job that you were doing while being in the theater?
I worked at a bank.
Okay, wow, that's not what I was gonna guess.
Yeah, a lot of my friends were working as waiters and waitresses, and other gig sort of related jobs. But I had worked my way through college working at a bank, and that's where I worked my holidays and my summers. And so I had been working at a bank for about a year when I decided to move to Chicago, and I was like, well, it's going to be easiest to just apply for a job at a bank. So there was an opening for a bank teller at Boulevard Bank, which was in the basement of the Wrigley building.
Oh, whoa.
And I loved working there because it was right there in the heart of the busiest, buzziest part of Chicago. And in the basement of the Wrigley building, underneath, I guess that was Lower Wacker Drive, was the Billy Goat Tavern that I knew about because they had made fun of it on Saturday Night Live with cheeseburger, 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 one of the original Saturday Night Live sketches. And so I would go there and I would eat my lunch at the Billy Goat Tavern, and I felt kind of surrounded. Even when I wasn't studying at Second City or watching shows at Second City, I still felt like I was touching base with it when I was at work.
Right. So before you went there, then when you were watching SCTV and then you were watching Saturday Night Live, was that the only thing on your mind? I'm going to be on Saturday Night Live. I'm going to be on SCTV. You didn't care about anything else?
Yeah. Well, I knew I wasn't going to be on SCTV because it really wasn't a show anymore at that point.
True.
But Saturday Night Live was, that was the goal. That was my ultimate goal. That's why I was, that's what I assumed was the path. And I knew that there could be other paths, at the time, George Wendt had gone from Second City to being Norm on Cheers. So I was like, well, I'll be happy if I could be a Norm on Cheers or, be that sort of a character on a sitcom. But what I really wanted to do was to be on SNL, to do characters and sketch comedy.
Right. And it's crazy looking the list of the people that were at the theater groups and improv groups you're at. IO Theater, you got Chris Farley, Mike Myers, Bill Hader, Vince Vaughn, Bob Odenkirk, and then obviously Second City. It's just a legendary cast of Steve Carell. You got the random guys like Andy Dick, Bonnie Hunt, and then more recent ones like Keegan-Michael Key, from Key and Peele. So you definitely were in the right spot, it sounded like. So working at these working at the improv organizations, who did you meet along the way that kind of took you under their wing, if anybody, and kind of gave you that advice or gave you those tips on how to move over to where you're going next, which obviously you wanted it to be Saturday Night Live?
Well, I was definitely, the people who were in my touring company were definitely very helpful and supportive. And that was, Rachel Hamilton, who was also in Comedy Sports before me. So I felt very welcomed into that company because I had already worked with her and knew her. But then also Kevin Dorff, who has gone on to write and perform in a lot of great stuff, and Ali Faranakian, who kind of became like my big brother figures. And I never had a big brother growing up. I had a little brother who I love very much, but I never had like a big brother. And those guys very much were big brothers for me. Rachel Dratch was also in my company, and Francis Callier. And they were, they would, show me the ropes. And, Francis would always say, make sure you always preset your props, which is so important. You had to make sure that you had all your props preset.
Right.
So you would sing this song, preset your props. Everybody preset your props. And so they all helped me in different ways to prepare for all of that. But there wasn't anybody like leading me and showing the way to like getting on a show like SNL. There was definitely Joyce Sloan, who was one of the founders of Second City, who was always so supportive. And when she found out that I was up for the Dana Carvey show, she said, well, you make sure and let me know as soon as you find out. And I sure did, because nobody else said, tell me when you find out. So she was one of the first people I told.
Right.
And now realize this woman has had almost everybody who's been hired at Second City and then got hired for Saturday Night Live or some big major show. She was the one they went and told. Mm-hmm. And despite the fact you'd think that the novelty of that would have worn off for her, but she was so genuinely happy for me.
Right.
When I got that. So Joyce Sloan would be the closest to somebody who, because she also gave me advice. She was like, Lorne Michaels is here tonight. You should go up and talk to him. Because when they were scouting for Saturday Night Live, Lorne Michaels was in the theater, and I was hosting. In other words, I was seating people at their tables and lugging big buckets of ice back to the bar, But I walked over and said hi to Lorne Michaels. He looked at me like I was from another planet. But it helped for me to meet him and see how much shorter he was than me. And
he does look like a short guy.
Yeah, he wasn't quite as intimidating as I thought he would be in person.
Right. Yeah, I guess being shorter than you helps. So then between all the improv organizations you're at and then getting the position at the Dana Carvey show, were you going on were you doing stand up on your own?
I wasn't doing that much stand up. I had done stand up when I first started out, and we were in St. Louis because other than the improv that we were doing, there wasn't many other outlets for comedy. Once I moved to Chicago, there was 3 different improv schools and improv theaters, and many more that I could have participated if I wanted to, but the 3 that I just had time for. Mm-hmm. So there was enough outlets for comedy that I didn't have to do it alone. And I think I'm stronger as a sketch performer and as an improviser than I am as a stand-up, for sure.
Okay, fair enough. I mean, again, that's another thing I could never do is stand-up. That just scares the crap out of me. And this is
all respect in the world to people who do stand-up. I just finished listening to Leslie Jones's autobiography on Spotify, which is Leslie. I don't know what your standards are for language on the show.
You can swear there. You can.
Leslie fucking Jones is the name of the.
That's a good name. I like it. I should make that the name of my show, the Quinn fucking Marr Show.
You should.
Or the fucking Marr Show, I guess.
Yeah.
So
that's the sort of confidence it takes to be able to say, "Hey, I'm Leslie fucking Jones."
That's true.
That's what it takes to really make it in stand-up. And I didn't have that sort of confidence in myself as a stand-up. Mm-hmm. Definitely as a sketch performer, and definitely as an improviser. But
I mean, at least you tried it and you figured that out what you liked better, right? Like, because then you could have just never tried and never known, and that's worse, I think.
Yeah, oh, for sure.
Right. So I was going through the Dana Carvey show, and there was one thing that stood out more than others. You are the announcer for the ambiguously gay duo. So can you explain this show to me, please?
All right. Well, I'll tell you the process that I wound up arriving to do this cartoon on Saturday Night Live. So as I was telling you, there was a time where Saturday Night Live was coming through, scouting everybody at Second City, and a lot of my friends auditioned, and several of them got on. David Koechner, who you might know from Anchorman, Whammy,
yep.
And Nancy Walls, who was also on the show, hilarious. She's married to Steve Carell. Those 2 got hired that season. I did not. A lot of my friends auditioned and did not get it that year. But Robert Smigel, who does Triumph the Insult Comic Dog,
Mm-hmm.
was exec producing the Dana Carvey show. And he loved the audition that I did for SNL and hired me. And the first thing that I did for the Dana Carvey show, like they flew me out there after I was hired, picked me up in a limousine and handed me a script and said, we're going straight to the Sony studios. I didn't even have an apartment there yet. I was just going in there to do some pre-records and some pre-tapes and stuff like that. And went into a studio and read the first lines I ever read. This week's episode, it takes two to tango. And I did the voice of the announcer. And we only did one of those on the Dana Carvey show. And it was such a funny concept that Lorne Michaels said, I'd like to have that on Saturday Night Live. And I didn't know that. So I'm popping popcorn and getting ready to watch a new season of SNL to see all my friends who are going to be on SNL. And then I hear, my own voice. This week's episode, it takes two to I was like, what?
Yeah,
I'm on SNL? And we did many, many more of those. JJ Settlemeyer is the animator that does all those, and did a wonderful job with those. Carell and Colbert, or Ace and Gary.
Oh, good.
And I did a lot of other voices of some of the lesser villains and the henchmen and kids and their coach when they were with the Ambiguo boys and they were teens. I played their wrestling coach. So that was the strange and interesting adventure of the ambiguously gay duo.
I feel like nowadays there's no way that would happen where you go to do a show on a certain TV show and then all of a sudden it's on something else without you even knowing. There's no way that would happen now.
You'd be surprised.
Really?
Yeah. I did, well, not on a completely different show, but like I did an episode of Young Sheldon.
Mm-hmm.
I did 2 episodes of Young Sheldon. And incidentally, without my knowledge, I was in 3 episodes because the first episode, I played the manager at a Red Lobster when they had this father-daughter date scene. And I was in so little of it. And I think my friend Lance Barber, who plays the dad on there, he might have lobbied to be like, hey guys, he got cut out of a lot of that. Can we get him in there? And, so, or maybe I just made a good enough impression on them, but whatever the case. I came back as the dean of the college where I'm welcoming all the students. Well, like 3-4 months later, I get people were like, hey, we saw you on Young Sheldon. I'm just assuming, they saw the rerun. That's cool. It's rerun. I get the rerun residuals or whatever. My uncle said, it looked like they reused footage from your other thing. Is that possible? And he taped it and then showed me the episode that it was in. And I was like, they did. They reused footage of me to show that Sheldon had been in this class all that day. Or no, that the girl that he was dating had been in this class. And I was like, and they cut away and they showed footage of me. So still happens. And if I hadn't tracked them down and had the union request that they pay me for that, I wouldn't have known about it. If it wasn't for my friends and family, I would have had no idea that they had used me and put me in another episode.
So you weren't going to get paid unless you had said something? Really? What the hell?
Welcome to showbiz.
Yeah, no shit. So then was it that they just used was it the same scene they'd used, or was it just extra stuff they hadn't used in the other episode?
It looked to me like it was the exact same footage.
What the hell?
But it wasn't with me talking. It was just or if it was me talking, then they were like they took out the sound, I think. But
right, okay.
So you wouldn't, if you had watched the other episode, all you would realize is that I was dressed in the exact same clothes. And only somebody who was my uncle would notice that I was.
Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough. It takes a family member.
Yeah.
So one thing I really want to get into, one of a few, was The Ringer. So this movie came out in 2005. And again, I had told you earlier, I was pretty young when I watched it. So I was probably about 9 or 10 when I watched it the first time. So for those who don't know, the movie's about a guy who pretends to be mentally challenged to rig the Special Olympics, right? It's a Johnny Knoxville movie. for you, when did you hear or how did you hear about the movie?
My agent sent me in on it, and there were other people that had gone in on it, and they said, "Hey, I told them they should see you because I had done this character with an intellectual disability when I was at Second City. I always played it with great sensitivity. It was always punching up and never punching down, and so people loved the character. They always felt very endeared by him, and so I think that helped get me in the door too." And it was recommended to me that I go in there in character and audition with Barry Blaustein, the director, he had previously been a writer on Saturday Night Live in the early days. Like he was like the writer that wrote predominantly for Eddie Murphy.
Wow.
With Eddie Murphy on a lot of that stuff. So they said, go in there in character. So I went in character. And he riffed with me a little bit. He asked me some questions, and then he was laughing. And I think he knew that it was a character and that I wasn't actually a person with a disability. And the thing is, if the movie were to be done today, they would do it completely with people with disabilities. They wouldn't have to resort to having us play as if we did. I think it's become so obvious that people with disabilities can do anything that we can do.
Right. Yeah, it seemed like there was about 70-30, I would say, of actors who were portraying that versus who actually had disability.
Overall in the movie, no, there were only three of us.
Like the main group, like your guys' little group.
Yeah, if you wanted to break it down that way. But there had never been a movie made with that many actors with disabilities in it. There had never ever been a movie made on that scale, because all the people in the stands, all the Special Olympians that you met, so it was a really unique experience.
Well, and that's one thing a lot of people don't know. People that like to rag on this movie don't know that it was made in conjunction with the Special Olympics, right? Yeah. So with that, before you actually took the part, did you have any second guesses on taking it?
I didn't, because I knew that my portrayal was going to be sensitive, and I had talked several times with Barry Blaustein, who had met with so many Special Olympians and gotten their input on the script, and I knew what a journey it was for him.
Right.
So there was never for a second in my mind any doubt that it was going to be done anything other than tastefully and professionally. Well, as tasteful as Johnny Knoxville can be.
Right, exactly. And he'd be the first to say that, right?
And he's incredibly sensitive and a really sweet guy, and as are the Farrelly brothers.
With that movie, there's a lot of improv in it. And you being such an improv guy, my favorite line in that from you is the shirt up or shirt down or perhaps tucked in. That's like one of the best lines. Was there a lot of improv in that movie?
There was. As a matter of fact, they had us come down about a month or so before we started shooting, and we would do table reads of the script. We would meet with Special Olympians. They had Special Olympians flown in from all over the world to meet, which was really exciting. Those are the global messengers of the Special Olympics, the Olympians that go and talk to the heads of governments, to other organizations about the mission of Special Olympics. And so we got to meet lots of Special Olympians, a lot of diverse groups of people. And then we would also improvise scenes that were, we'd say like, okay, now we've read the scene in the script. Now let's just do it. Let's riff it. Let's see what would happen if we weren't working with a script. What would we do? And so a lot of the moments that wound up in the screenplay, the brilliant screenplay by Ricky Blitt, who, for people who aren't familiar with Ricky Blitt, he was a writer on a bunch of different episodes of Family Guy, some of the funniest and edgiest episodes. And Ricky he plays the new guy on Loudermilk on Netflix, which is a great show if you have not seen that. But he plays this kind of neurotic guy in their group therapy.
Yeah, my mom's been watching that show, and I recognized him, and I told her, "Hey, he's from The Ringer."
Yep. Yeah. So yeah, so Ricky wrote a great script, and so he was very generous and was very open to the improv that we did. There's some improv that you can't even hear in the script. Like there's this one scene where I'm up there giving my acceptance speech, and Jeffy Knoxville's character is telling Katherine Heigl's character Lynn that he was a fraud, and then he was pretending, and she slaps him or whatever. And you hear me in the background, and I was riffing, I was improvising, and there's one line where I say, "Today I consider myself the luckiest man on my face," which is a take on the old Lou Gehrig line about "Today I consider myself the luckiest man on the face of the earth." But Ricky told me, he said, "I just felt so happy when I heard you improvise that line."
Right.
And so he was very open with. He did not feel like we were like encroaching on his material, or if he did, he never gave any inkling that he was.
Right.
Fairley Brothers, who were producing it, were definitely all about improv, and Barry, was very open to improv. And I even led a special improv workshop for all the Special Olympians at one point. Oh
wow!
Yeah,
that's sweet.
Yeah, my sister videotaped it, but it's such poor quality, it's not worth releasing anywhere.
That sucks. Yeah. And of course, like me and my friend Kyle, the one thing we always say to each other is, "When the fuck did we get ice cream?" We love that line so much. So that was improvised, correct? And you can see Knoxville laugh.
Yes.
So because you're in the corner there, being in that scene when that happened, what was going on?
Well, what had happened was Jeff Arend decided that he was going to throw that line out there, and actually he from what I heard, he was talking to Jed Reese, and he said, "I think I'm going to say, when the hell did we get ice cream?" Mm-hmm. And Jed said, "Say fuck, it'll be funnier." So I think they kind of came up with the bit together in a certain sense. So he said, "When the fuck did we get ice cream?" Everybody lost it. And then Pete Fairley got really pissed. He was like, "Damn it!" And everybody thought that he was mad at Jeff for improvising that line. But no, he was upset that people couldn't keep a straight face and were laughing behind camera. He goes, "Now we're going to have to do it all over again because we didn't get it in the clear. And I want that line in this movie."
Right.
And they had to fight for it because you can only have like one F-bomb in the whole script or something like that.
Really?
To keep it PG. Because I think we were PG or PG-13. One of the two.
No way, really?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, There's one of my lines that I had to go in and re-record so that it didn't sound dirty, which was it was a line that I also improvised, which was "What a cod block," which is actually, I was supposed to be "What a cock block," but they had me go in there and loop it and dub it so that it sounds almost like cock block, but they would say in the script that it was cod block. Like a cod piece that covers a man's area like that. So it was like, and I think Barry Blaustein came up with that alternative because he had me come in the studio and record that. And I was like, why are they doing this? It's funnier with cock block.
Yeah.
But now that I know, they wanted to preserve the rating because they felt it was very important. The whole reason why they got Johnny Knoxville was they were aiming at a younger audience, and they wanted to get this message about diversity and inclusion to that younger audience.
So then when the fuck did we get ice cream? Did you guys do like a million takes for that? Because how did it end up being the one where Knoxville laughs in the movie?
I think they wound up being able to take out the sound of the crew laughing, and I think we reshot it once or twice. But every take there's multiple shots, multiple different angles, and they probably kept that one in there because it was the best take of. Right. Of Jeff delivering that line, and that Knoxville was in the frame on that one, and they didn't want to scoop in and cut that part out. So
it is weird how like certain swear words makes an entire line funnier. Like going from hell to fuck totally changed it, made it that much funnier.
Oh yeah,
it's interesting how that works. So for you,
well, part of it is because when it's used judiciously.
That's true.
If there would have been a bunch of fucks here and there and fuck this and fuck that,
right?
It wouldn't have hit as strong. So,
and it was a more serious scene too. Like the guy basically got cheating and everything, and we're figuring out like what's going on, and then he pulls that line. for you, that movie now being almost 20 years old, is there any, like you had mentioned before, you think it'd be an all cast of people with disabilities? Could that movie be made the way it was now, or is there no chance?
Not the way it was made. I think it would have to be made like if they had any of us who were not with disabilities in this movie, they shouldn't have us. I've said this several times. They shouldn't have us playing people with disabilities in this version of it if they would reboot it. And they kind of did a somewhat of a version of that. A movie with Woody Harrelson last year where he was the coach of a Special Olympics basketball team.
Right.
So in a way, they've kind of, already done, they've touched on that idea, but as far as, having an actor play somebody with a disability and faking it, I don't think that movie could get made today.
That's fair. I just don't like that there's sometimes, or with certain people, there's a certain knock on the film as if like you guys are making fun of them. But again, that's not true, or the Special Olympics wouldn't have worked with them.
Yeah. Well, It's the same way with like, I think too many people don't get that, that yes, there's material today that could not be done again in quite the same way. Like you could never make Blazing Saddles again the same way that it was made.
That's fair enough, right? Yeah, there's a lot of things said in there that shouldn't.
But you don't need to, There's been, like there's literally, a movie up for Oscar contention that, is literally a black Western, So we no longer have to say like, it could happen, It's like, yeah, no, it did happen. The original cowboys were people of color,
right.
So, and the use of the language that was used in Blazing Saddles, no, you wouldn't want to use that today because people don't use that word all the time. But in the Wild West, and still in the 70s, that word was in usage, and it was used by racists, and they had the racist characters use it, and even the little old lady to prove that racism can even exist in a little old lady with a pie.
That's true. That is true.
So. Yeah. Sadly, this movie couldn't be made the same way, but it doesn't need to be made in the same way.
That's a good point. Just to celebrate having you on here, I'm gonna go back and rewatch that tonight because fuck, is that a good movie? God, it's so good. Even almost 20 years later, I'm still laughing the same way I was when I was 10.
That's great.
So of course, I know I'm taking a lot of your time, but I do want to get into Wizards of Waverly Place.
Sure.
So you played the principal, Mr. Lariate, which I want you to tell the little bit of a fun fact about the name. I heard you tell this on the Wizards pod, which I didn't know because I'm younger, so I didn't really get the reference. Yeah,
well, there's so many jokes on that show that were written because it was one of Disney's first family shows. The other Disney shows were kind of kids shows. This show was a show that you could watch with the whole family, that it wouldn't insult the parents, intelligence. And so my character's name was based on a character in Bewitched, which, by the way, Bewitched, the 1960s sitcom about a woman who had witch powers, is going to be rebooted. I heard they're also rebooting that. But the boss's name in that show was Larry Tate. And so when they were coming up for a name for my character, they just slammed the first and last name together and made it his last name, Mr. Larry Tate.
Something a 11-year-old Quinn would have never noticed. But you of course played Mr. Larry Tate. I was talking about the principal that loved wearing bolo ties. So I'm assuming you just heard about the show through your agent, and at the time it was Amazing O'Malley. So can you kind of give me a little insight on that process from hearing about the part, the audition, and then eventually getting the role?
Yeah. Well, I did see a copy of the pilot, which was titled Amazing O'Malley's. By that point, they had already changed the title to Wizards of Waverly Place, which was, I think, still just a working title. And they were about 4 episodes in. I had flown in from St. Louis because I had bought a house in St. Louis with my wife at the time. And it was for a movie called All About Steve with Sandra Bullock. An audition, and I did not get that part, but while I was on my way there, they said, hey, we want you to read for this other audition. Can you please read for that? And I said, yeah, sure. I was like, but I don't think I'm going to, well, actually, I told him I didn't want to because it was going to be a really long trip, and I was already preparing for this other audition. There was also a personal tragedy in my life at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was like, I really don't know if this is right. And they said, please, please, please. And so I did. And I arrived there, and it was like an hour past when I was supposed to be there. I said, told you guys, after the flight and getting the rental car, there was no way I was going to get here on time. Should I go back home? And they said, no, we just called in. They're still waiting for you. So I went in there. I was not off book. I was not well rehearsed. I was not coached. Read for the audition. But before I got off the lot, they checked for my availability, and they told me I was on hold. And later that evening, I booked it.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Would you ever see yourself as being a character on a Disney show?
Not really.
No.
Not really. I wasn't opposed to doing a Disney show,
Right.
but that wasn't what I was aiming for at that part in my life. I didn't think, oh, I'm going to be an adult on a kid's show.
Right. What did you bring to Mr. Lariate from yourself? Like, was there parts of Bill in Mr. Lariate? I know you actually do like bolo ties. So was that you, or was that already written into the
Oh,
character?
no, that was not me. The affinity for bolo ties came after the show, and I was like, hey, I like bolos, kind of.
You saw yourself wearing them so often. You're like, you know what? Maybe I do like them.
I'll wear them to on TikTok and for some movie premieres and stuff like that.
Right.
But that was Peter Murrieta, the exec producer, who's from Arizona, and it is the official neckwear of Arizona. So, I don't know if I brought much to myself outside of, I kind of felt like I brought like a retro feel. I wasn't doing an impression of Larry Tate, but I was doing a kind of a retro. If you go and look at that character, he doesn't act like a real person acts. It is a little bit of a retro sitcom character. So I brought my love for the old sitcoms, I think, to that. My love for improv, there was a lot of improv involved in that because Peter Murrieta, that I mentioned earlier, was the showrunner, was a very big fan of allowing us to play around with it. As long as we weren't, you got to stick to the pages when you're doing the table read. But once you're up and working it and putting it on its feet, he was the sort of exec producer that was like all about allowing us to clown around and, find new bits. And we would be playing around and improvising stuff that was just for fun. And all of a sudden it'd wind up in the script the next day. And I'd be like, oh, I guess they like that bit.
Oh, wow. Would you see that from like Selena or David or Jake or Jennifer, any of them? Or was it mainly like either you?
Yeah, I think everybody played around with it a little bit to the extent that they felt comfortable. Yeah.
Right. And for you, you were mainly working with young actors. So like Selena, I think was 16, Jake was 14. I think David wasn't even 20 yet. So what was that like? Was that new? Had you done that before, or was it kind of mainly adults the entire time?
I hadn't worked with many child performers at that time,
right.
But they were all very mature and respectful. And, one of my favorite stories about Jake at the time, and God knows how young Jake was, but, he'd come up to me and was like, hey, Mr. Cott. And I'd be like, Jake, we're coworkers. You can call me Bill. And he was like, okay, Mr. Cott. But they were all very professional. And so it wasn't like they were temperamental, like you hear about these child actors sometimes can get out of hand. That was never the case with the cast of Wizards.
Right. And that's amazing because you have someone like Selena who was just blowing up at the time, and she was only getting bigger and still is. So that's really impressive to hear.
I think what we can attribute that to is the fact that first season was shot before the show was released.
The whole season? Oh, wow.
The whole first season, because they wanted to push it back and make sure that they were releasing it at the right time. And they finally released it right after the premiere of High School Musical 2.
Mm-hmm.
So they gave it the best possible launch that they could give it.
Right.
And so Selena may have been recording at that time, but nobody knew about the show. So she didn't have an ego about it, and none of the kids had an ego about the fact that they were on this TV show because they were just living their lives and making this show for all they knew. And so by the time we came back for the second season, there had already been this family vibe that had kind of grown out of the natural process.
I had Daniel Fathers on a couple months ago who played the uncle in Camp Rock, and
Mhm.
we had talked about the difference between the first Camp Rock and the second one, just because of the careers of the Jonas Brothers and Demi Lovato and like the differences. You
Mhm.
didn't notice any of that, with the cast from like the later seasons? That's awesome.
No, never noticed any sort of like temperamental behavior, crazy, out of hand behavior. In fact, when Selena turned 18, she invited the cast and crew of Wizards to her birthday party. So like,
Wow.
I was there, the makeup people and wardrobe people were there. It was an inclusive, it was not like some, 18-year-old banger of a party because,
Mhm.
at that point, Selena could have had like the wildest, craziest party in the world.
Oh God, yeah.
And it was a very down to earth, family event.
She
So
does seem like the nicest person in the world.
she really is.
Yeah. Did you ever get to meet Bieber?
I briefly met him. He was on set, obviously, to see her,
Mhm.
and he had his hoodie pulled up kind of over his head. And I was walking out through the bleachers and stuff like that. I don't think this is one of the days where we had the audience there.
Mhm.
It was either a rehearsal day or we were doing pre-tapes. And I walked by, and but nevertheless, I'm sure he wanted to make sure there weren't any like photographers or anything there. And I was wondering who that was, and then like he like peeked his head up from under. He was like, "Hey," I was like, "Hey," and then I was like, "That's Justin Bieber." Wait a minute, that's Justin Bieber. And then I realized he knows who I am. I'm performing with his girlfriend on this show.
Right.
So it wasn't just like I got to meet Justin Bieber. It's like Justin Bieber got to meet me. That was
Yeah,
kind of
exactly.
exciting. He knew
Exactly.
who I was. It wasn't just like I got to see him. So
Mhm.
that was exciting too.
I was really surprised to see you're only on 23 episodes. Maybe it was like my little kid brain, but I felt like you're in it a lot more, in a good way. But it just felt like it was a lot more Mr. Lariate than there was.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think it's, um, when you establish an ensemble like that, you don't always need every member of the cast to be there for them to be there in spirit,
True. There was a big episode. I saw that you weren't in, was the Shakira episode.
Yeah.
What the how were you not in that one? What the hell were they thinking?
I don't know. I would have loved to, but then, they budgetarily, they don't want to get, every person in an episode. And since, they already had Shakira, they're blowing a budget on Shakira and Jeff Garland, who
Right.
plays the uncle. So they didn't need to be throwing any extra folks there, throwing them a bone. I didn't realize until recently that I was in that same episode as The Rock with the water fountain.
He was in the most random Disney Channel shows. I think he was in Cory in the House at one point. Like he just appeared in Disney Channel shows along the way.
Yeah. Kids always ask me about who was your favorite guest star, and I would always say, "Oh, I think Joanne Worley and Ted McGinley," and they don't have no idea who those people are. But I do, because Ted McGinley was in Happy Days, and he was in Married with Children, and Joanne Worley was in Laugh-In, which was the big comedy show when I was a kid. So they were like, "What about The Rock?" And I was like, "I wasn't in the same episode as The Rock." And they were like, "Yes, you were." And I was like, "What?"
Yeah.
And I just saw that episode recently here, and I was amazed.
The power of editing.
Yeah.
Right.
I think that they may have shot that on a different day, because they shot him in there, or maybe when I did the table read, like I'm not good at reading the rest of the script when I'm doing a show, so I don't, if in the table read they didn't mention Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, I may not have known that he was going to be there that week, and then if somebody said, "Is The Rock here?" I wouldn't have thought of, is the actual rock.
Yeah. No, why would you?
They're like, "Oh, is there a big rock that they're putting on?"
Yeah, is there a boulder? You were mentioning how like they basically aim to make this one of the biggest Disney Channels Disney Channel shows by having it after the premiere of High School Musical 2, and it ends up being the series finale was the biggest Disney Channel series finale ever. It still is, which is really insane that they started big and they ended big.
Yeah.
It's crazy. So for you, for Disney Channel or Disney Plus, how does that work for like that being hopped on their streaming service now. Is that something you're still getting checks from now that's on a streaming service?
I still do get residuals. They're not from the same amount that they would be from when they were on Disney Plus or Disney Channel.
Fair,
Yeah.
that's fair. But hey, it's not. At least it's not like Young Sheldon where they're trying to pretend like they didn't add more work for you, right? Right. So, a couple more things, and I swear I'll let you go. About a month ago, there was an announcement of a Wizards reboot, and I've seen some of your clips of making jokes about it and stuff. Have you heard anything about Mr. Lariate being in it?
I have talked to the exec producer of the show, and I need to put a call in to David to talk with him about it. But yeah, David has said that he and Selena, who are the exec producers, really want to have everybody from the cast in this in some way or another. So I'm sure I'll make an appearance at some point if it gets picked up as a series. How often I'll be in it, I don't know. I do know that it's focusing on his kids, and his kids have to be in a school. So I might be one of the people that's most likely to be there just so they can have a real life school to be at.
Well, it's funny because I mentioned that to my mom earlier about maybe you being in the reboot, and she goes, "But would the kids be old enough to be in high school?" I'm like, "Actually, yeah. The show ended 12 years ago. They could add an extra year. The kids are 14, 15 years old. I mean, and if not, if they're in elementary school, there'd be some sort of story where you ended up being in elementary school instead. Either way, if they want to make a spot for you, they'll make a spot for you."
Yeah.
Right. And that's awesome because I did read about David saying that he wanted everyone from the original cast to make an appearance at one point. And it's nice to see that he's actually like sticking to his word. It sounds like he really is making an effort. So that's really cool that they're both executive producers on the show, because if two people know how to make the show good, it's those two.
Yeah.
Has there been was there talks of a reboot over the years since the show ended? I'm sure.
Yeah, people have been asking about it, and everybody all along has said, yes, I'd be up for it. Yes, I'm interested in it, including Selena. But what she has always said, guardedly so, is, with if it's the right script, because you don't just want to do it just to do it. So I have a feeling that they've got really, really powerful script to move forward with here, and, a plan for the season. And fingers crossed for that. I don't see, it would have to test extremely poorly for them not to give it a shot.
Well, and I was surprised when you said that it needs to get picked up. I had assumed it already got picked up somewhere.
No, pilots are done all the time, and they don't always make it to series. There was a pilot that I just posted on TikTok recently that I was in called Star Patrol. And Charles Rocket, who was a second Saturday Night Live alumni, was the captain of the starship. So this was years before the Orville, and maybe the same year as Galaxy Quest, which I was also in. But it was a pilot. It was a really funny show and didn't get picked up. So there's lots of funny pilots out there that never see the light of day. But there's, for a sequel to a very well-known show, I would be very surprised if it does not get picked up for at least a full first season.
For sure. There's one show that I think really did well as a reboot, and that was Raven's Home. For me, being such a big fan of That's So Raven, especially in the later seasons, they've had her move back to the old house and live in the same area. They've done a really good job at introducing the new characters, but then making it for someone like me that watched it when I was a kid. And that seems like it's hard to do, because you don't want to just have the exact same show with new characters. You want to get new fans involved. So no, I'm pretty pumped that, and it seems pretty sure that I'll be watching the Wizards reboot sooner rather than later. And I'm hoping Mr. Larry Tate will be on there. The last thing I have for you is you run your own improv classes now? Yes,
I have something called the Improv Trick, and people can take classes online and in person.
Nice. Okay, and you're in LA?
Yeah.
Okay, so you do run those in LA as well, on location?
Yeah, we have classes in Pasadena. We're also going to be reopening classes in the San Fernando Valley, and like I said, there's online classes coming again soon. So if anybody from anywhere in the world wants to take class, they can just go to theimprovtrick.com and let us know what city they're in and how they want to join us online.
Amazing. Well, Bill, if there's anything else you want to promote, the floor is yours. I know you're on numerous social medias and making your funny videos all the time. So yeah, anything you want to promote, it's all yours.
Well, I just came out on there's a series on Netflix called Pluto, which is an anime series, and I play Detective Nakamura. So if anybody wants to check that out, enjoy that. And if you're a fan of Wizards, let them know you want to see Lariate.
Absolutely. And I'll be making sure that the people watching this do make a bit of a stink that they want Mr. Lariate on the show. Cause no, we need the bolo tie wearing principal back on there in some form. I don't know how they would do it. People way smarter than me are doing it. Some way you need to be on there. So yeah, Bill, thank you so much for coming on here. This was amazing to have the chance to chat with you of all thing Wizards, and of course one of my favorite comedies, The Ringer. So just learning more about you was something I really wanted to accomplish with this, and I feel like I did. So yeah, thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you, Quinn. This is great.
All right, I'll talk to you later.
And that was the Quinn Marr Show.